Hello and welcome. First, I'd like to thank the library for having me here today. But just as important, all of you who are brave enough to show up to talk about legends and lore of winter. So with that, let's begin. My name is Chad Lewis. I'll be your presenter for this program. And although my background is actually in the field of psychology, for the last 25 years I've been traveling the world in search of the strange and unusual. Everything from hunting for vampires in Transylvania, looking for the Loch Ness Monster, crop circles, reports of UFOs, alien abductions, really weird people, odd places, you name it. If it's strange and a little offbeat, I've traveled the globe in search of these mysteries. But for this program, we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics, legends and lore of winter. Now, of course, when people think of winter, many things jump to mind. For a lot of you, it's probably the hassle of shoveling and removing all the snow. For others, it's outdoor activities, skiing, snowboarding, snowshoeing. Others like to enjoy some ice fishing. And I know for a lot of you in the Midwest, football is a big part of the winter legends and lore. But I'm going to be talking about a different type of winter, a stranger, more sinister, folklore-filled aspect of winter. Most people think of Halloween as the season of weirdness, creepiness, and legends. But as you'll see today, winter is full of stories of witches, werewolves, monsters, and the like. So for the next 45 minutes or so, we're going to take a tour to some of the weirdest legends and superstitions and folklore that winter has to offer. Fair warning, this might be your opportunity. If you'd rather not see these stories, you still have time to turn it off, go watch a Hallmark Christmas movie, and enjoy the holiday season in a little less sinister manner. Okay, many of you are still brave enough to stay around. Let's explore winter folklore. Starting with Old Man Winter himself, the bringer of ice, the bringer of cold. For many people, this is just a concept, much like a fake or a made-up piece of folklore. But for many people in Minnesota, they believe the bringer of cold and ice is called Wazetta. And if you go to the middle of Minnesota, to Mille Lacs Lake, here you'll have a story of where Old Man Winter battles with the forces of heat and summer. And it all began on a place called Spirit Island, bunch of rocks in the middle of the lake. It was thought to be a sacred area. Many people who would venture out here in the summer in boats would hear what appeared to be singing or chanting coming from the rocks. Others say these rocks would move on their own, as though moved by some unseen force. The legend has sprung up that this is where winter begins, and that those who want to make a plea of honesty will walk out to the rocks and claim to be honest for the rest of their lives. It is said that if you go out there and make a plea of honesty, a pledge of honesty, that if you ever tell a lie, a rock will fall out of the sky and hit you, and you will die for not being honest in the winter season. This is where they believe Old Man Winter fights for the ice every single season, When fall starts in, he takes over, but loses the battle every spring when summer starts to make its way there. Of course, I had to make a winter expedition out to Spirit Island to make my own pledge of honesty. And while I was walking there, brutal cold temperatures. It took about an hour to get there over the ice. And I finally made my way out to the rocks. But along the way, as I was walking in the freezing cold, one of my feet got wet. Maybe some snow got into my boot or some ice, but my boot was getting wet. But I didn't pay it any attention. I couldn't stop because it was so cold. So I made my way out to the rocks, made my pledge of honesty, and then made my way back. Later that night, when we made it to our lodging for the evening, we were unpacking our gear, getting ready for an expedition, when I realized that it wasn't snow that had gotten into my boot. It was blood. My foot had been cut open in my boot and giving me a bloody boot. But I consider myself getting off light. If the bringer of winter did nothing more than cut my foot rather than drop a rock on me, I consider myself getting off quite easily. Winter solstice. For years, people have feared the solstice as a time when things could come back to earth. Things not of this realm or this existence. This was the night when they could come back and haunt you and come back and seek revenge on those who had wronged them in life. Witches were one of those creatures that were thought to come back during the winter solstice, which is why so many people advise that on the solstice you should have a fire in your fireplace to ward off the witches and other spirits that might be coming during the solstice. And the hearth or the fireplace was the spot where all the little people would gather in your house. Not children, but the gnomes, the fairies, the goblins, the trolls, the good people, the hidden folks, the sprites. You know, something straight out of folklore. Pointed ears, pointed nose, sometimes a cap. This is where they would congregate in your house. And if you appease them, they would often work around your house, cleaning, keeping your house free of rodents and the like. But it was said that you would have to put out offerings for them, especially in the winter solstice. Most of the time you'd want to put out treats, baked goods, candies, donuts, cakes, pies, things of that nature, so that the little people, when they make their way through on the winter solstice, they will see your offering and they will be happy with you and not curse you. It was often said that you'd leave your doors unlocked during the solstice because that's when the little people would make their way from house to house looking for offerings. If you do not leave an offering, well, you do so at your own risk. We all love birthday parties, and some of you watching here today probably have a birthday over the 12 days of Christmas. Most people consider that December 25th through January 6th as the 12 days of Christmas. But if you do have your birthday during this time period, raise your hand wherever you are so your loved ones can see, because they're going to want to keep an eye on you. Because the legend tells that those who were born during the 12 days of Christmas are much more likely to become a werewolf because of when they were born. Some believe they were born too close to the birth of the Savior, and they'd be cursed with being a werewolf for taking attention away from the Savior's birth and placing it on your birthday. And of course, throughout the United States, we have reports of werewolves throughout the winter. Thanks to my good friend and colleague Linda Godfrey, my home state of Wisconsin is now known as the werewolf capital of the world. It all began when Linda was working as a journalist. People started reporting traveling down a small stretch of road called Bray Road, when all of a sudden they spotted, for a lack of a better term, a giant werewolf-type creature. Size of a giant bear, but shaped more like a wolf with that long snout or muzzle and the deep, dark, matted down fur. Oftentimes these things are seen as bipeds, running or walking upright on their hind legs like you and I do. In Iowa, outside of Fort Dodge, in a small town called Tara, they believe this bridge is inhabited by werewolves. In Illinois, in Effingham, near the Ramsey Caves, they believe werewolves inhabit there too, and many, many other places around the U.S. The good news is that outside of charging at a couple vehicles, these creatures seem to be just as afraid of witnesses as witnesses are of them. And rather than attack, they seem to rather scurry into the underbrush undetected. So the good news is, when you go looking for these creatures, most likely you won't be killed. Well, 50-50. Do so at your own risk. Everybody loves Christmas, whether you celebrate it or not. It's that time of year people have a lot of fond memories. For many people who practice Christmas, they have the fond memory of sitting around the tree with their family, telling stories, opening gifts. These are some of the most cherished memories people have. But of course, I'm not going to be talking about that type of Christmas. I'm going to be talking about a different type of Christmas, a weirder and more bizarre Christmas filled with monsters, spirits, and folklore. Let's start with the Yule log. And when I talk about the Yule log, I'm not referring to the trees. I'm talking about the actual Yule log. During the 12 days of Christmas, it was your duty to go out on your land and cut down the biggest tree you could find and bring it into your house. And you'd put the large end of the tree into your fireplace and you'd let it burn. Slowly, as it burned off, you'd move more and more of the tree into the fireplace until the tree was completely consumed over the 12 days of Christmas. You would then use the leftover embers to start the following year's 12 days of Christmas Yule log as well. But today, a lot of people are not out cutting down giant trees and dragging them into their homes to burn them for 2 weeks. Instead, many people have put candles through their house, kept them lit for the 12 days of Christmas. Some even putting them in their sink to avoid any possible fires or trouble throughout the 12 days of Christmas. When they leave the house, they put it in their sink for safe measure. There's also a ton of lore about Christmas Eve itself. One of the old legends, when many people were involved in farming, was that on Christmas Eve, that was the one night when you could go out to your barn and hear your animals talking to one another, that they had the ability to speak on Christmas Eve. But it was advised that you do not go out there to listen, because one, they would be talking bad about you, but two, it would be bad luck. You'd be cursed to the end of your days for listening to them talk on Christmas Eve. Instead of listening to your barn animals talk, you may want to spend Christmas Eve sitting underneath a pine tree. The legend is that if you sit under a pine tree on Christmas Eve, at midnight you will hear the angels start to sing. But this might be the last thing you ever hear, because the legend tells that if you do hear angels singing, it means you are going to meet them in the next year when the Grim Reaper comes after you. That if you hear the angels, it is an omen of death, that death will soon come for you. Others believe on Christmas Eve, especially around midnight, you can turn water into wine much like Jesus did, that when you start drinking water, it will mysteriously turn into wine. But again, it is advised that you do not drink this wine because ill effect, mishap, misfortune, and death is said to follow for those who take a sip of this forbidden wine. People love carolers during the holiday season, going out singing all the old Christmas carols. But in the old days, caroling wasn't done just to spread cheer. It's actually done to ward off the devil and evil spirits. Carolers would make as much noise as they could, singing, banging on pots and pans, as that was the thought was that would keep the devil and evil spirits at bay. Which is the same concept of hanging up evergreen and holly in your home. Not only was it a sign of everlasting life because it lived throughout the winter, but it was also said to ward off evil spirits, not only symbolically with its everlasting life, but also physically, how prickly it was. It was thought to ward off spirits, including those pesky witches that are so heavily associated with the Christmas time of the year. Many would not stop at just evergreen, hanging it in your house. Many would put horseshoes at the entrance of their doors. And these horseshoes were thought to ward off witches during the winter time. But the key was you'd have to hang the horseshoe upside down to ward off evil spirits. If you hung it upward like this, right side up, it would not ward off spirits, but it would collect good luck. That all the good luck would fall in there and stay. Whereas if you ward off spirits, the good luck runs out of the horseshoe, but you will be protected from the evil spirits wandering this winter time, the darkest days of the year. Arguably, the most infamous aspect of winter is that of Santa Claus. Everyone is familiar with Santa. We all know that Santa doesn't do his job alone, that he has helpers, from all of his magical and wonderful reindeer, to the wonderful Mrs. Claus, to all of the elves that are so important in getting the gifts out to children every single year. But Santa has another helper, a less known helper, a helper that many people do not want to see, because this helper doesn't help him reward the good children. This helper, his right-hand man, is a punisher of bad children. They call him Krampus, the anti-Santa Claus, even though he's more of a Santa Claus friend and helper than he is of the anti-Santa Claus. He's a giant creature, devilish looking, with horns, glowing eyes, a tail, a whip, and a basket. The origins of Krampus come from the old countries of Europe, where they told of Saint Nick passing through communities. And Saint Nick would often leave out candy and fruits in the shoes of children who placed them there, hoping to be rewarded by Saint Nicholas. But it was said that Saint Nick only visited the good children. The bad children would be visited by Krampus, and he would often bring his switch of sticks, and he would whip children that were naughty. If they were terrible, he would put them in his basket and take them away to his lair, and they'd never be seen or heard from again. Parents in the US tell children, "You better behave or Santa will bring you coal." Parents in other places around the world took it a step further and said, "You better be good, because Santa won't just leave you coal. Krampus will come and grab you and whip you and take you away." Believe it or not, the old traditions were that people would send one another postcards, Christmas cards, during the season that said greetings from Krampus with all of these eerie and creepy Krampus pictures and drawings on them. People would send thousands of these every single year. It's a tradition that some of us continue to this very day, as I still send out Krampus cards every single year. But Krampus comes on the night of December 5th. That's when he appears. And he is spread all over the world now, especially in the United States. On December 5th, Krampus night, that's when many places have parades and festivals where people dress up like Krampus and make their way through, whipping kids and adults the like. There are many festivals about Krampus throughout the U.S. In the Midwest, one of the biggest is the Milwaukee Krampus Fest, where you can see people dress up and parade through the area. But the rest of the country weren't the only ones to believe in weird winter superstitions. Right here in the U.S., lumberjacks were full of winter traditions. Of course, the lumberjacks would go into the woods every winter in the Great Lakes area and out on the northeastern portion of the U.S., cutting wood to get it ready for the spring thaw, where they could throw it in the river and bring it down to all the mills along the lumber towns. But they believed in many superstitions of winter, including a creature they called the snow snake. It was pure white. It migrated its way over from Siberia, of course, and it only appeared in the winter. It hibernated every summer, waiting for the temperature to get cold enough to come out. It was pure white, and its bite could kill a lumberjack, but not through its venom. Its bite would actually freeze a lumberjack to death. And there was only one cure, only one antidote to a snow snake bite. And that antidote was a shot of whiskey. As you can imagine, many lumberjacks were said to have been bitten by these snow snakes to grab a shot of the whiskey. The lumberjacks also talked about terrible winters, the winter of the blue snow. They called it the winter of the blue snows because it was so cold and snowy that people cursed a blue streak in the air that turned all of the snow blue. It was so cold that winter. What's that? How cold was it? It was so cold that winter that fish grew fur to keep warm. It was so cold that winter. How cold was it? It was so cold that at night, people talking would have their words freeze in the air. They had to wait until the next morning during sunrise to thaw out the words so they could hear what their friends were talking about. It was also the winter when Paul found Babe the blue ox. Babe was so cold that he had turned blue from all the blue snow. So Paul took him into his camp, and like everything around Paul Bunyan, Babe grew to an enormous size. Today in winter, we think nothing about people dying. If they die in the winter today, we just bring out the backhoe and we're able to give them a proper burial. But in the old days, they didn't have this technology. So they had receiving vaults or holding vaults. When people died in the winter, they could not bury them in the Midwest in the frozen ground. They'd had to wait till spring came around and it thawed out enough for them to dig a proper burial grave. This led to many stories of these holding vaults or these receiving vaults being haunted with ghosts and spirits. One of my favorite stories of one such haunting is in Marshalltown, Iowa, Riverside Cemetery. This is the old receiving vault. It was said that a man buried his wife in the vault, but the problem was he buried her alive in the vault. And now many unsuspecting people walking by will hear rapping and knocking on the door. Others claim to have heard things like, "Help me, I'm inside, let me out, please save me." Some claim they've seen the handle move on its own, as though some unseen force. Of course, there are no people inside the old receiving vault. At least not anyone who's alive, that is. When most people think of winter, they often think of snow. And when you're a kid, when you think of snow, you mostly think of snow days, school closings, children staying up late the night of a snowstorm, praying that school will be canceled. Many of them have found tips and techniques to help aid this process along. Because one of the legends is that if you want a snow day during a snowstorm, sleep with a spoon under your pillow, and this will cause a snowstorm and a school cancellation. You also can help your cause by wearing your pajamas inside out and backwards so that a storm will be on the rise. Other children will put ice cubes in the toilet for every inch or number of snowstorms that you want, or inches of snow that you want to fall. That will predict the number of snowstorms that you get. And we can predict snowstorms if you believe the legends. And we can predict signs of a hard winter. But you have to be someone with a very keen eye to pick up on these signs. Because old farmer legends tell that you can tell if it's going to be a hard winter by things in nature, like caterpillars. If they're especially woolly, that means there will be a hard Christmas. If squirrels have an extra bushy tail, it means it will be a hard winter. If corn stalks, the husks are extra thick, or the hair around a cow is extra thick, these all portend a sign of a bad winter. The problem is, most of us today would not know whether a cow had more hair around its neck than in previous times. It would be very difficult to determine a squirrel's tail, whether it was bushier than it was just a few weeks ago. There are some signs in nature that we can pick up, even for those of us without an uncanny knack of doing so. Like woodpeckers. It is said that if you see more than one in a tree, or if they're sharing a tree, it means that winter is going to be especially brutal this year. Winter itself, the elements, the force of winter, is also to blame for many legends. Now, how many of you recognize this place in Iowa? Sorry, bad joke, a cornfield in Iowa. But you will recognize this place when I tell you this was the spot where music died. 1959, Buddy Holly, Ritchie Valens, and J.P. Richardson, the Big Bopper, were all playing the Winter Dance Party. They had just finished their gig at the Surf Ballroom in downtown Clear Lake, Iowa. Buddy Holly was upset because their tour bus kept freezing up on him and breaking down. So he hired a plane to take him and two other artists to the Fargo, North Dakota area for their next gig. The next morning, when the plane never arrived, they sent out a search party, and they didn't have to go far. Just north of Clear Lake, they found the crashed remains of the airplane. All three of the artists and the pilot were killed on impact. Some years later, they put a makeshift memorial for the artist out there. And if you follow this trail for about a quarter mile, you will get to the exact spot where they met their end. Many people take comfort and solace knowing that the music of these men will continue on forever. But others believe it's more than the music that continues on, because they go out there and they hear the phantom sounds of music being played. But when they look around, they're surrounded by nothing but fields. Others see what appears to be a plane crash into the ground, but again, no plane is there. My favorite stories come from unsuspecting motorists driving up the gravel road when all of a sudden they see someone on the side of the road, thinking perhaps the person broke down or need some assistance, they slow down only to report coming face to face with what they believe is the ghost of Buddy Holly himself, complete with his trademark eyeglasses. Well, if it is the ghost of Buddy Holly, he seems to be busier in death than he was in life, because many places claim to be the final resting place of his spirit, including the Surf Ballroom in Clear Lake. Now, if you've never been to the Surf Ballroom, it's a great place to visit. Even if you don't believe in ghosts or spirits, it's a great place to explore musical history and a lot of Americana as well. Winter also brings with it seasonal affective disorder, or SAD. People in the United States, millions of them, are affected by the low levels of sunlight and all the darkness. It changes chemicals in their body. They become more depressed. They become less filled with energy. They become less social and withdrawn. And sometimes that is said to lead to legends and bad things happening. Such is the case up in northern Minnesota in Embarrass. This is called the Old Heritage House. And the story goes something like this. Many years ago, a family lived out in this house. They were Finnish immigrants called the Fahala family. And during a harsh Minnesota winter, the father snapped. He went crazy, had a psychotic break, what we might consider cabin fever. You know how people in Minnesota get in the winter. So when spring came along, he told his son that Jesus was able to walk on water. You should be able to walk on water as well. And he made his young son go down into the churning, ice-filled waters of the Embarrass River, where he drowned. And now the legend tells that if you park your car out on the bridge, not only will you see the ghost of that young boy, but he will act like some winter siren, trying to entice you into the water to save him by saying things like, "Help me, I can't swim, I'm drowning, please don't leave me, save me." Legend is, if you're foolish enough to go into the water, he will pull you under and you will spend eternity in your watery grave in the river. People also claim the house is now haunted as well. That not only is the bridge haunted by this young boy, but so is the house. Now, the story's not quite accurate. One of their sons did die. He drowned in the Embarrass River. But when I dug up his death certificate, it had it as an accidental drowning. In fact, one of his brothers, Werner Fahala, wrote a book about the accident and said it was a rafting accident. They were skipping school. Not only did the father not have anything to do with it, he didn't even know they were skipping school. But that hasn't stopped the legend from growing and progressing, to include the house itself, saying that if you walk up to the second floor, you'll be chased out of the house by that murdering father. As you can see, the house has sustained damage over the years and vandalism. My advice is, if you're going to go there, take one of the official Finnish heritage tours where they will let you in the house, you won't have a trespassing ticket, and maybe you'll have a ghostly experience. Or sit out on the bridge by yourself at night. It's a creepy area. Livestock make some weird noises in the area. And if that's not scary enough, you may want to take a dip into the water, where every little branch or twig that passes by your legs is going to have your mind conjuring up images of that boy's hand coming to grab you. Winter is also the deadliest time of the year for ships out on the Great Lakes. It's a time when many ships go under with the harsh, brutal weather that serves from November through March in many of these areas. If you ever stop at any tourist destination along the Great Lakes, you'll probably see this poster at gift shops. It shows the hundreds of ships that we know have gone down in the Great Lakes, this one just of Lake Superior itself. These are just the known ships that have gone down. You can imagine the many more that are unknown or have never been documented. Back in 1927, this ship went down at the bottom of Lake Superior. Many years later, divers found it at the bottom on its side. Specialized, trained divers went down to the water and found the ship, and they were amazed at what condition it was in. They even found rolls of lifesavers in pretty good condition after all those years. The reason being is that the temperature is so cold at the bottom of Superior, it almost acts like a preserving agent, a freezer. It's also down there that these divers saw weird lights flashing about. They thought they weren't alone, that other people were down there. But there were no other people there, except the spirits and bodies of those who lost their lives in the December capsizing of this craft, including a spirit so many have seen that they have dubbed him Old Whitey, because they believe he is a former member of the crew that refuses to leave the ship, even from the grave. Others claim that on foggy nights on the Great Lakes, you can see phantom ships that will appear. At first glance, they look like they're from the 17 or 1800s. But when people try to get a closer look through binoculars or a camera, they simply vanish into thin air. Recently, someone believed they filmed a phantom ship. They posted the video on YouTube. You can go there and see for yourself, watch it and see if it's a mirage, an optical illusion, a hoax, or a phantom ship out on the horizon of the Great Lakes. This next winter legend I'm going to talk about is one you might not want to know about. It's certainly one you don't want to say its name, because many cultures believe that merely saying the name of this next legend is enough to put you on its radar. That when you go looking for the weird will come looking for you. Of course, I'm talking about the most feared creature ever to set foot in North America. And that creature is called the Wendigo, the cannibalistic monster of the North. It began as a First Nations spirit monster up in Canada. And it appeared during the harsh Canadian and northern Great Lakes areas, the winters when times were tough. Game was nowhere to be found, food was scarce, and people resorted to cannibalism. That's when the Wendigo would appear. Known by many different names and many different spellings, the Wendigo was a hideous monster. Somewhere between 8 feet tall and as tall as it wanted to be, even bigger than the treetops. It was always very thin, skeletal looking, very muscular, but almost emaciated looking. In northern Minnesota, they believed that when you saw the Wendigo, that it was a harbinger of death, a death omen. That if you saw it, much like hearing or seeing the Irish Banshee, it meant you or someone you knew was going to die very shortly from seeing the Wendigo. Many times the Wendigo is said not to have a mouth or lips because in its insatiable hunt for human flesh, the hunger becomes too much and it starts to eat its own body. The scariest part is the fact that the Wendigo can not only kill you in a flesh and blood form, but it also can possess you and slowly turn you into a Wendigo. We have hundreds of accounts of people in the 17, 18, and early 1900s of killing one another because they believed that person was turning Wendigo. And when they went to court, they said, if we wouldn't have killed this person, this Wendigo, they would have overtaken the entire village, the community, or the tribe, and they'd all be dead because of the deadly Wendigo. Perhaps the most infamous story of a Wendigo that we have is that of Swift Runner. Swift Runner was a Cree First Nation Indian up in the Alberta region of Canada in the winters of 1878 and 79. Swift Runner is what the white people called him, although many newspapers said he was the Indian who ate his family. He was about 40 winters of age when he was overcome by the Wendigo. So what is the horrific story of Swift Runner? Well, let's take a look.
In the deep woods outside of Edmonton, Alberta, Swift Runner, a Cree Indian, was a trapper and a guide. He had left town the previous autumn with his wife, 6 children, and his mother. But when Swift Runner returned in spring, he was alone.
Swift Runner came into a nearby village telling this heartbreaking tale.
I had to watch them starve to death.
Of his family being killed by starvation, and that he was the only survivor.
My whole family gone.
It wasn't hard to understand a family falling victim to a brutal winter. Yet something was suspicious about Swift Runner.
He was a strapping man, and he came into town weighing over 200 pounds. It didn't look like somebody who had just weathered a terrible winter. He wasn't malnourished, didn't look like he was starving. He looked healthier than ever.
After a few nights, it became clear that something was wrong.
He started having night terrors, screaming in his sleep.
I have the Wendigo!
Villagers alerted the police.
Swift Runner actually guided them back to his winter cabin. When they got there, that's when they saw the true horror. Human skulls were scattered around, many bones, some of which had been snapped in half, and the marrow inside had been drained. They had never seen anything like it. Swift Runner had killed his entire family, shooting them, hitting them with an axe, strangling, and then eating most of their bodies.
I told you this was a case you didn't want to know about. So Swift Runner started out as a great winter. He went off with his family to their winter hunting grounds, and originally he had taken bear and moose, but when game got scarce, as you saw, he overtook his family. And he said at that moment, the Wendigo suddenly took possession of my soul. I killed the last of my children and ate him. Swift Runner was then brought to Fort Saskatchewan. They put the gallows up and took his life at the end of a rope. Father Leduc, who was there at the end with him, offered him salvation, which legend tells that he said, "The white man has ruined me. I don't think their God could amount to much." And he lost his life at the end of a rope up at Fort Saskatchewan in Alberta, Canada. But the Wendigo made its way to the United States as well. There are many stories of the Wendigo in the Great Lakes region, one of which is just east of Bemidji, Minnesota, at a place aptly called Lake Wendigo. It's a lake on an island in a lake, making it an anomaly in its own right. Here it is featured in a Ripley's Believe It or Not cartoon as the lake within a lake. Many believe Star Island is haunted, that there have been several books about the ghostly stories of Star Island. One of my favorite stories tells of people going out to the island. The women set up base camp along the shoreline, started cooking. The men went into the woods to hunt for game. And when they never returned that evening, the women the next day went out looking for them and found them all strung up, skinned, dead, hanging from a tree. They left the island. They cursed it, said it was bad medicine, that they would never set foot there again. When reinforcements came back, they found no bodies were recovered. They couldn't find where the men went or where they were hanging. There are other terrifying tales of people finding giant holes in the ice of Lake Wendigo, with gigantic footprints coming out, walking to the island, as though the Wendigo came out of the ice, walked to the island in search of prey. So back in the winter of 2015, I set off on an expedition to Lake Wendigo with my colleagues Noah Voss on your right and Kevin Nelson on your left. Now, you can't tell, but that's me in the middle there. The reason you can't tell is it's 30 degrees below zero with the wind blasting us as we had to walk for several hours carrying our gear across the lake just to get to the island. I'll give you a taste of what that was like. As you can see, we're all tethered together. In case one fell through the ice, the other two could rescue them. So we got to the island. Now my colleague Noah and I decided we were going to spend the expedition in our frozen tent. But my colleague Kevin over here, he wanted more of an adventure. So he was going to spend the expedition in his hammock out in 30 degree below zero weather. The first thing we had to do was get a fire going, not only for heat, light, and warmth, but we had to keep our tallow hot. Tallow is an animal fat, and one of the legends is that you can use hot tallow and pour it down the throat of the Wendigo. It will defrost its icy heart and it will kill it. Just how you're supposed to pour it down its throat, I'll leave it up to you to come to your own conclusion. But we made our way to the lake. Now many believe the lake is the Wendigo, that it uses the lake as a giant kettle. Numerous children have drowned in the lake. Parents who summer here do not allow their children to swim in the lake because the legend is the Wendigo will snatch you off the shoreline and pull you under, and you'll spend eternity with the Wendigo in the lake. So one night we had a great base campfire going. Noah and I walked to the middle of the lake to try to conjure up the Wendigo. As we did, we paused, and Noah said, "We're filming this, but our boots are too loud crunching the snow. Nobody's going to hear what we're talking about. We have to be very quiet." And as we paused, something on our left startled us and caught our attention. Let's take a look.
Okay, see, I'm trying to be quiet for...
What is it?
Don't have eyes or anything.
Let's take another look.
Okay, see, I'm trying to be quiet for...
What is it?
Don't have eyes or anything.
Now, most likely it was a deer or a big bird of prey or an owl, something. We didn't see anything, but I can tell you it got our adrenaline going, so much so that my colleague Kevin slept with his axe right next to his hammock just in case. But if you're going to go there, you might plan to do so in the summer. You'll have a much more pleasant opportunity, and maybe the Wendigo won't come after you. But when you've heard all these legends and lore of winter today, you might think that they're nothing more than superstition and beliefs of folklore that have long since passed. But in fact, the legends live on. Many cultures advise not building snowmen because it is thought that they will turn into a Wendigo or come to life and try to attack and terrorize you. And I think what this program illustrates this evening is that these stories continue on. They're not some relic of the past. These beliefs, these fears, they continue forward in today's world just as they did hundreds of years ago. So I want to leave you with the parting thought of, what is tonight's forecast? How dark, cold, and sinister is it going to get? And when you put your head down on your pillow tonight to go to bed and you hear the wind rustling outside your window, I want you to ask yourself, is it possible, just maybe, that wasn't the wind howling outside your window? And if you want more information, my website has more than you could ever want or need. But I really hope your adventure doesn't stop here after the program. Grab one of my books, Go on your own adventure of your area. And I think you'll discover that you live in one heck of a weird place. And I mean this in a good way. That when you're out traveling, you'll see things you've never seen. You'll meet some odd people. And along the way, you might just discover that the scariest thing out there is often yourself. So with that, I want to thank the library for putting this together. If you like programs like this, let them know so you get more of these. If you didn't like this program, let them know so you get fewer of these. But either way, the library's put a ton of work into getting me here. I can't think of a time in history when the library has served such an important role as it does today. With everything going on with politics, the pandemic, societal issues, libraries are the fabric that keeps the community together. They are a real treasure for any place that has one. So, to show my appreciation, if you're looking to get any of my books on my website, Chad Lewis Research, type in the library as the coupon code. You'll save 20% of all my books just in appreciation of the library. So with that, thank you all for coming and keep an eye out.